The Secret War with Iran, the 30-year clandestine struggle against the world's most dangerous terrorist power, by Ronen Bergman, translated by Ronnie Hope, narrated by Dick Hill. Copyright 2007 by Ronen Bergman. Translation copyright 2008 by Simon & Schuster, Incorporated. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Ronen Bergman and Sterling Lord Literaristic, and was produced in the year 2008 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. For my father, Shmuel Bergman, he sets the standards for kindness, honesty, and devotion. Preface. George W. Bush famously described Iran as part of the axis of evil, while Iranian leaders regularly refer to the United States as the Great Satan. But presidential rhetoric in Washington and Tehran aside, the Iranian clerical regime, and not the Iranian people, is unquestionably an enemy of the United States. Consider, Iran has chemical weapons and an active nuclear weapons program. It is a sponsor of international terrorism. It is dedicated to spreading a brand of Islamic revolution that is virulently anti-Western. In short, many of the concerns that were cited and disputed as grounds for invading Iraq are indisputably true of Iran. True, Iran has not launched full-scale invasions against its neighbors as Saddam Hussein did against both Iran and Kuwait. Instead, it has been skillful in conducting its military adventures so as to avoid the wrath of the West. For the past 20 years, Iran has masterfully used Hizballah as a proxy, maintaining a veneer of deniability. It has sponsored terrorists, working closely with al-Qaeda prior to 9/11, after which point it became expedient to maintain some distance from that network. And while the world had become obsessed with Osama bin Laden and his lieutenants, it forgot that the most dangerous of all terrorists before the advent of al-Qaeda, a Lebanese Shiite by the name of Imad Mohnia, who was responsible for the death and kidnapping of the biggest number of Americans until 9/11, was alive and well and a frequent welcome visitor to Tehran until he was blown up by a car bomb in Damascus early in 2008. The Iranian threat is a top priority of the U.S. defense and foreign policy establishment. This threat has appeared particularly urgent ever since Western intelligence agencies, the CIA and the Mossad, as well as MI6, the French DGSE, and the German intelligence service, suddenly realized in 2002 that despite their concerted and often coordinated efforts to track the development of Iran's nuclear program, and their overall assessment that Iran's nuclear ambitions were being successfully contained, the Iranians had been able to fool them. Their nuclear program has advanced to the point where production of an Iranian nuclear bomb is now probably no more than a few years away. This unsettling discovery raises a fundamental question. What exactly are Iran's nuclear ambitions? When the day dawns, as it may well soon do, and Iran is in possession of a nuclear bomb, what will it use it for? According to a CNN USA Today Gallup poll from 2006, over 80% of Americans believe that Iran would supply nuclear weapons to terrorists to be used against the United States. Many in the U.S. defense establishment agree. Indeed, the Pentagon and the CIA, in close cooperation with Israel's Mossad and the Israeli Air Force, are drawing up plans to deliver a knockout blow to Iran's nuclear installations before any weapons are produced. However, it is also possible, some would say probable, that the main purpose for which Iran wants nuclear weapons is to deter the United States from doing to Iran what it has done to Saddam Hussein. What is clear today is that any decision to strike Iran from a distance, much less invade it, can only be made against the background of the bitter experience in Iraq. America went to war against one man, Saddam, and defeated him, only to become mired in the quicksand of the complex and intractable tribal and religious conflicts of an entire country. If there is one thing that everyone agrees on, it is that drawing lessons from the military imbroglio in Iraq is imperative. And the most important of these lessons is that there is no substitute for high-quality intelligence. Know thy enemy, both his strengths and his weaknesses. Even if the startling and disputed announcement in the U.S. National Intelligence Estimates in 2007 that Iran had halted its nuclear weapons project in 2003 was correct, it is clear to all that Iran could easily pick up where it left off, using the enriched uranium that it admits it is producing. The problem is that after 3 decades of trying to meet the Iranian challenge with a variety of strategies, covert negotiations, arms deals, critical dialogue, containment, direct political confrontation, and indirect action against its proxies, we still do not understand Iran. We do not know what its leaders want to do, and we do not know how to stop them from doing it. Or at least, we do not know enough. The West, most notably the United States and Israel, has maintained for 3 decades an effort to gather, analyze, share, and act upon covert intelligence on Iran. This book follows the drama of this secret intelligence struggle against Iran. At its heart are the 2 most concerned countries, Israel and the United States. Both have played a complex role, each trying to compensate for the other's disadvantages as they cooperate in intelligence gathering and in operations. There have been many failures, and some successes, too. This book brings these fascinating and sobering stories to light in order to contribute to the understanding of a regime that is a far greater danger to the West than Saddam Hussein's Iraq ever was. The story ventures along the secret paths inside the intelligence communities of both countries, while describing in detail many Mossad operations. The United States relies on Israel's intelligence agencies for much of its Middle Eastern intelligence collection. Israeli successes are immediately shared with the United States, and Israeli failure means American blindness. In many instances, Israel and its battles have served as testing grounds for American weapons and for combat tactics developed in the United States. This book is based on thousands of documents and some 300 interviews with pertinent people in 20 countries. Unless cited specifically in the text, all interviews quoted were conducted by the author. A detailed survey of Iran's part in international terror requires the use of intelligence material gathered by Israel, the United States, France, the United Kingdom, and Germany. Research on such a subject is highly complex. Many sources are necessarily anonymous. Disinformation and simple errors have often crept into journalists' reports on Iran. I have made every attempt to verify and cross-check the information here, yet it is not always possible to be certain of every detail. Intelligence sources have their own agendas. Whenever accounts differ, I have tried to say so. Ultimately, however, an abundance of corroborated testimonies and independent sources leaves no room for doubt as to the general trends. Iran consistently supports terrorist operations against a wide and ambitious variety of targets, and Iran is consistently trying to acquire nuclear weapons. Here, then, is a view of the greatest security challenge the United States is facing. Part 1. Green Storm Rising. Chapter 1. The Twilight of the Iranian Monarchy. At least one immediate lesson was learned from the catastrophe that befell the CIA in Tehran with the collapse of the rule of the Shah. Shred your secret documents both vertically and horizontally. On November 4th, 1979, 9 months after Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini overthrew the Iranian monarchy, a group of students decided to stage a demonstration in front of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The angry crowd soon found that they could enter through the gate without resistance. They poured into the compound and seized dozens of embassy staff, the start of America's worst hostage crisis, which lasted 444 days and helped destroy the presidency of Jimmy Carter. Among the protesters was one particularly militant young man by the name of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Some of the American diplomats would later testify that he was one of their jailers and maltreated them in a particularly brutal way. The hostage-takers, who called themselves Muslim student followers of Imam's line, discovered a treasure trove of intelligence inside the embassy. Just over a year earlier, as tension in Iran began to mount, the CIA's representatives in Tehran had decided to ship a large part of their classified documents out of the country, just in case. The documents were packed into crates and flown to the United States, only to be returned to the embassy 2 months later. The staff found it too difficult to work without an archive, and besides, in an emergency, the classified material could always be shredded. As the student revolutionaries entered the embassy grounds, CIA station personnel began urgently feeding the secret papers into shredding machines. Most of the material was shredded into thin strips. The students, some of whom were soon to be among the founders of the intelligence services of the Islamic Republic, found only a small number of documents intact. But the CIA had not taken into account the determination of the revolutionaries. Some 250 female students were given a painstaking job. First, they combed the embassy compound garbage bins and retrieved the shreds. Then they set about sorting them and putting them back together. The task took 2 years of meticulous labor. Today, as a consequence of their success, high-security shredders use spiral-toothed blades which leave only tiny scraps that crumble in one's hands. The students had recovered a treasure trove of top-secret information on all the aspects of Iranian-American relations. The reconstructions of those documents were released in book form in limited editions. Some were even put on sale in bookshops in Europe. By June 1985, 61 volumes of selected documents had been published. They provided priceless insights into the intelligence methods and diplomatic activity used by the United States and Israel in Iran. They were also highly embarrassing to the old Iranian regime. The CIA's 5,000 paid informers encompassed government officials and officers in the military of all ranks, including at senior levels. The restored documents led to purges by the Revolutionary Guards of the bureaucracy, the media, and the armed forces, and to executions of top personages who had collaborated with the CIA. They revealed the extent to which the United States was involved in Iran's internal affairs, with the connivance of the Shah, who owed his hold on power to American intelligence. In 1953, the Shah was forced to go into exile after the liberal Mohammad Mossad practically took over the government. In August of the same year, Namtallah Nasiri, a young captain in the Iranian army, approached Mossad and in an act of great courage handed him a letter of dismissal signed by the Shah. Mossad was surprised and a little amused. He did not know that behind Nasiri and the Shah stood a powerful conspiracy, with both the CIA and the British MI6 as partners. The two agencies initiated Operation Ajax, which called for spontaneous mass protests in Iran and a number of clandestine actions that eventually led to the triumphant return of the Shah. In 2000, U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright officially apologized for America's role. Nasiri later became a general and headed the much-feared Savak, the Shah's secret police. The reconstructed documents also reveal the extent to which the CIA's analysts failed to grasp the danger of the Shah's overthrow. One of the documents was an evaluation sent by the CIA to Jimmy Carter's White House in August 1978, which argued there was no chance that the Shah would be toppled in the near future despite the increased rioting. A few weeks later, the National Intelligence Estimate came out, containing a prediction that the Shah's rule would last another 10 years. Admiral Stansfield Turner, CIA director from 1977 to 1981, said in a press interview later, We did not understand who Khomeini was and the support his movement had. We were just plain asleep. The strips of shredded documents also demonstrated the extent of CIA knowledge of Israel's intelligence activities and detailed the intimate relations between the Israelis and the Shah's regime. For example, they described a secret meeting between Major General Ezer Weizmann, the renowned former commander of the Israel Air Force, who had been appointed Minister of Defense in the government of Menachem Begin in 1977, and Lieutenant General Hassan Tufanian, Iranian Deputy Minister of War and Armaments. Tufanian was a CIA informant who supplied the agency with the meeting's protocol. It offered clear evidence that Israel had developed, manufactured, and intended to sell to Iran long-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads under the code name of Operation Tzor. Reuven Merhav, head of the Mossad station in Iran at the time, explains that the Shah wanted to work with Israel more than ever after the election of Jimmy Carter in 1976. Carter began asking questions about human rights, including everything that was going on in Iran, recalls Merhav. The Iranians were scared that the gates would close in America and Western Europe, and were looking for alternative sources of supply for their weapons needs. Israel and Iran planned to build a tremendous military co-production line, the biggest Israel had partnered in until then. There were a total of 6 projects. Israel was to supply the know-how, and Iran the money and test sites. At the end of the process, the Iranians were supposed to be able to produce the weapon systems themselves. The largest project concerned Israeli-made ballistic surface-to-surface missiles with a range of 700 kilometers. As one senior Israeli military source at the center of the relations with Iran explains, the Shah wanted Iran to become a regional power, and to be a regional power he needed a mighty army. He needed a fleet of Boeing 747s to fly his generals, his ministers, and himself around, so he bought no fewer than 12. He needed to host international conferences, so he built guest houses with golden bathrooms, and he needed missiles. I know that he was also thinking of nuclear weapons. The deal called for Israel to supply Iran with its Jericho missile, which is based on an old French design. Though Israeli censorship doesn't allow publication of specifics about the Jericho, according to non-Israeli media, it can carry a nuclear warhead, and according to the authoritative Jane's Defense Information publications, 3 squadrons of Jericho missiles at the Israeli Air Force base known as Wing 2, located near a village called Zachariah, southwest of Jerusalem, are in fact armed with nuclear warheads. In addition to the Jericho missiles, the projects included plants for the manufacture of 120mm mortars and artillery pieces, the development of a modern sea-to-sea missile called Perah, Hebrew for flower, with a range of 200 kilometers, and a warplane originally called the Lion, later the Young Lion, or Lavi. A very senior source in the Israeli Ministry of Defense reveals that the weapons deal with Iran was fraudulent. With each of the 6 joint projects, the Israelis planned to deceive the Iranians by providing them only an outdated version of the weapon in question, while using Iranian money to build a new generation for Israel's exclusive use. The details of the various deals were worked out at a series of meetings, mostly between the Israeli ambassador to the Shah's regime, Yuri Lubrani, and General Tufanian. The latter was very close to the Shah and was in charge of all military purchases abroad, as well as local weapons development and manufacture. Yaakov Shapiro, the Defense Ministry official in charge of coordinating the negotiations with Iran from 1975 to 1978, recalls, "In Iran, they treated us like kings. We did business with them on a stunning scale. Without the ties with Iran, we would not have had the money to develop weaponry that is today in the front line of the defense of the State of Israel." After witnessing a missile test at a secret base south of Tel Aviv and the destruction of a target far out to sea, a highly impressed General Tufanian persuaded the Shah to proceed with the deal with Israel. The agreement was conditional on each side setting up straw companies in Switzerland, owned in turn by companies registered in the Virgin Islands. The deals would be signed between the companies without a word about the governments involved, and the papers were worded in such a way that if they were ever discovered, their true nature would not be discernible. Yet the efforts made by the Shah's army to disguise these projects were exposed even before the U.S. Embassy was occupied. General Mohammad Antazemi, who reported to Tefanian and knew of the deals, wanted to save his skin once the Ayatollah Khomeini took power. After hiding out for a few days, he turned himself in, requesting immunity in exchange for the documents about the Swiss straw companies. He took members of the Revolutionary Guards to a secret apartment in Tehran where he had hidden copies of hundreds of reports and of the correspondence between Israel and Iran. His thanks were that he was strenuously interrogated and then executed by a firing squad in one of the city's squares. The surprising success of Khomeini's revolution put a stop to Israel's plans to arm Iran. Indeed, if Khomeini had not taken power as early as he did, he might have taken over a country armed with long-range missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and with a range that covered large areas of Europe and all of Israel, as well as a jet fighter that was supposed to be the best in the world. The Israeli relationship with Iran changed radically in 1979, as did America's. The revolutionary regime had turned the country's two most useful allies into its greatest enemies. Unfortunately, neither enemy knew much about the new man in charge in Tehran. Sayyid Ruhollah Khomeini was many things. He was far from the simple conservative many in the West thought him to be. A closer look at his doctrines reveals that the man who preached for a return to pure Islam was in fact a revolutionary, or a cynic, depending on which way you look at it, who reshaped Shiite Islam to suit himself and his lust for power, not hesitating to bend in accordance with the demands of a changing reality. The Shiite faith was born out of a deep feeling of deprivation and grievance. The Shiites claimed that the legal heir to the Prophet Muhammad was his son-in-law and cousin, Ali ibn Abu Talib, and that all subsequent rule over Muslim believers should have been in the hands of his descendants. Shia is an abbreviation of the phrase, the faction of Ali. The Sunnis, by contrast, claim that Muhammad died without appointing an heir. Ali did rule for a few years, from 656 to 661, but they were years of constant internal strife. Finally, he was murdered, whereupon the Umayyad dynasty took over and ruled from 661 to 750. To this day, the Shiites see that as a criminal and despicable usurpation, and the reign of the first three caliphs as an arbitrary confiscation of the Prophet's inheritance. The Shia were born as victims of injustice. In the dominant Shia tradition, there are, in effect, two kinds of people. The first is the superior few, generally no more than a dozen, who are entitled to issue religious directives independently, dictating to their followers. They are chosen in accordance with their knowledge and seniority by Shiite institutions, the most important of which are in the holy city of Qom in Iran. All others are the imitators, who must choose one of the Ayatollahs and obey his rulings. For centuries, the greatest weakness in the Shiite establishment was the divisions and personal rivalries between the different Ayatollahs. Only rarely did one of them rise above the others and manage to unite a large-scale following. Khomeini was the first in hundreds of years who succeeded in uniting almost the entire Shiite faith under his leadership. Khomeini bore the hereditary title Sayyid, meaning Lord, used only by descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. Since the first Imam, Ali, rule over the Shia had passed from father to son. In 874, after the murder of the 11th Imam, al-Hasan al-Askari, his son, then a small child, is said to have gone into a cave at Samarra, some 100 kilometers north of Baghdad, and has never been seen since. The Shiites believe that when the day comes, the hidden Imam will be revealed again as the Mahdi or Messiah. Khomeini belonged to the Mousawis, descendants of the seventh Imam, Musa ibn Jafar. After seizing power and declaring the Islamic Republic, Khomeini appointed other Sayyids from the same clan to most key positions, including the presidency, the head of the Supreme Court, the deputy speaker of the Majlis or Parliament, and dozens of ministers, deputy ministers, district governors, ambassadors, legislators, and directors of state-owned companies. Sayyid Ahmad, Khomeini's grandfather, settled in the city of Khomein in around 1840 and set up his own small religious school. He was considered a peerless Islamic scholar. 6 months after his son Ruhollah was born in 1902, Mustafa, Ahmad's son, was murdered. The fact that he was stabbed 6 times and his son was only 6 months old rendered the child a Bad Kadam, or a child born under an evil sign, destined to bring only disaster on himself and his family. The repulsion with which the family and neighbors viewed the boy was so powerful that his mother sent him to a distant aunt, who undertook to bring him up until he turned 16. As a young man in his family's hometown of Khomein, the future revolutionary became a well-known preacher, acutely expert in the intricacies of the faith, but lacking in charismatic oratory. For many years he professed, at least outwardly, the conservative teachings of the Shia, by which religious sages do not rule themselves, but only advise the king. In 1962, however, Khomeini underwent a dramatic change. After a period of seclusion, he emerged from his bedchamber convinced that he had been visited by the Archangel Gabriel, God's special messenger, who had told him that Allah had chosen him for great things. From that moment on, the Ayatollah's conduct was completely different. For one thing, he began to speak simply, abandoning his hitherto complex, profound style so that more people would understand him. His new vocabulary was limited to some 2,000 words. By sheer repetition of certain phrases, they took on the nature of magical incantations. Second, he began to portray the world as a clash between good and evil. The evil must be uprooted and destroyed, a duty that had to be performed by the good, who were both judges and executioners. His followers among the poor found this persuasive. Finally, in order to prepare himself for the role that he now desired, Khomeini shook off the basic separation of civil and religious authority that had always prevailed in the Muslim empires, and declared there was no longer a need for a king advised by religious sages. The government should be in the hands of the sages themselves. Not only was monarchical rule no longer acceptable, but so was any regime that was not headed by a religious authority. The presidents of Egypt and Syria and the kings of Jordan and Saudi Arabia were all heretics whose rule was illegitimate. Khomeini's ideology, advocating a return to pure Islam untouched by foreign influences, constituted a great innovation for the Shia. And his next great innovation drastically changed the way the Shiites interpreted their defining historical event, the Battle of Karbala in 680. When Hussein, the son of the Imam Ali, tried to reclaim rule over Islam for his family, he and 70 of his followers were killed in the battle. The anniversary is marked in the Ashura ceremonies, where the participants cut themselves until the blood flows. The Iranians had mourned the death of Hussein for some 1,400 years, seeing it as a great tragedy. Khomeini told them that Hussein had died in honor, and that death should be sanctified, whereas life was something to have reservations about. You must pray to Allah that He grant you the honor of dying for the sanctification of His name, he preached. Khomeini's attitude to the issue of martyrdom was meant to prepare the ground for his assumption of power. He explained to his supporters that the highest sanction in the hands of the state was the power to execute its citizens. Take this sanction away by changing death to a desired reward, and the state became powerless. Khomeini's next step was to shatter the most important traditional custom of Shiite theology. He allowed the believers, even encouraged them to call him Imam. This title had been reserved by the Iranian Shiites for Ali and the 11 leaders who came after.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?